Hi everyone, thanks for joining me and coming along this journey of sharing my birth story. Buckle up, it's a lot, it's long. I totally understand if you don't make it all the way through the video, but just ever since the birth of my son, I've had a lot of questions, how did it go, blah, blah, blah. And really for the longest time, all I could say was, it was really difficult, it was hard, and it just doesn't capture it, right? If you stick around to hear the whole story, that is just a gross oversimplification. Because yeah, of course, birth and labor is hard no matter what. There's no way around it. No matter which mode of delivery your baby comes, it's hard. But it was just a lot. So I actually wrote out my birth story pretty soon after it happened, so I wouldn't forget the details, but truth be told, it's just taken me a long time to share it. A couple of times I even talking to a couple of friends and acquaintances, I kind of rushed it and I just kind of felt icky about it, and I wasn't ready to talk about it. Talked to a therapist and some close friends who have given me the space to do so. And so now I feel kind of reclaim the story. I think there's still a little bit to work through, but we're getting there. So I am going to read from what I wrote, just so that there's some continuity, but I'm going to try not to read all that I wrote because it is a lot. But we'll see how it goes. So hopefully, I just hope that this gives other women either just some peace in that, birth is unpredictable. You can do as much as you can to prepare, but ultimately, your baby, God, the universe is might have another plan for you, and you can see the reason or the purpose maybe, or not, something that's going to come with time. But just that, you're not alone. Birth and becoming a mother is totally crazy. So here we go. I intended a natural, unmedicated vaginal delivery. I quickly learned the meaning of birth preferences versus birth plan. I was scheduled for an induction with Cytotec and Pitocin on February 4th, 2025, which was 41 weeks and 5 days gestation with my son. I had come to peace with this as I did research into the cautionary 42-week deadline, if you will. And in my opinion, the risk outweighed the benefits of going beyond that. I know some people have their opinions and preferences for doing that on their own. And when I say I did research, I really looked into medical journals, reputable sources, and it really is risky for so many different reasons. If you're curious about that, about going beyond the 42-week kind of post-term date, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can give you some of those resources or just explain it to you in simple terms. At the end of the day, I was always putting the safety of my baby and myself first before any rigid plan. I tried it all to get labor going on its own. For example, walking, curb walking, Swiss ball exercises, having sex, nipple stimulation, acupuncture, massage, acupressure, dates, pineapple, raspberry tea, everything. I, don't want to toot my own horn here, but I was the most prepared, as you could be. After all of that, I was still 0 centimeters dilated on the Friday before, which was January 31st. And it was extremely discouraging. I again did some soul searching and was okay if I needed to be induced, but was still really trying to manifest this little boy coming on his own. After all, I came 10 days late to my own mom, one day before she was scheduled to be induced, which was at 41 weeks and 3 days. I did have one more natural tool I could try that I heard works every time, but has some unsavory side effects such as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. With clearance from my OB and a tried and true recipe from my doula, I took 4 tablespoons of castor oil in a milkshake on Sunday, February 2nd. Despite coming to peace with the possibility of an induction, I was praying and hoping I could naturally induce myself and still have the birth experience I wanted and thought would be best for my little guy, even if it meant enduring the side effects of the castor oil. Per Tiffany's advice, Tiffany is my doula, I set an alarm and woke up at 5 a.m. to start this process. Truth be told, I woke up excited and super nervous. I was hopeful this would work, I wouldn't be too uncomfortable, and I would get to meet my son by the end of the day or the next at the latest. I drank the castor oil milkshake without any detection of the castor oil, which was great because I heard it tasted terrible. Put on Space Jam, cuddled up with my husband Jay on the couch, and waited. 30 minutes later, I started to feel nauseous and knew the castor oil was about to do its work on me. I rushed to the toilet and my vomit didn't quite make it into the toilet. Then I had to turn right around and my body expelled whatever was left in my system out the other end. I can chuckle about it now, but that was extremely unpleasant. Super, super unpleasant. Honestly, looking back on it, everything I know now and kind of at the end of this, I don't know if I'd do it again. Eventually, all that stopped and I gradually started to notice some lower abdominal cramping. It was working. I called Tiffany to give her an update and she said, rest, rest, eat, rest, repeat. I was going to need energy later in the labor process, meaning active labor, 6 centimeters and above, and pushing, of course. I followed her advice and got back in bed around 8 to 9 a.m. The contractions were around 8 minutes apart at this point, and I was able to sleep through them. Through the day, they got 4 to 5 minutes apart, and I was excited. It was go time. Or so I thought. I called Tiffany again, and she said, not so fast. Since my cervix was still firmly closed 3 days before, she explained it was highly unlikely I dilated to 6 centimeters that quickly and that I needed to give the castor oil time to work its magic. If I went to the hospital now, it was likely I would get sent back home. I trust her experience, so I settle back in bed with Jay, turn on Harry Potter, my comfort movies, and rest some more. I ate, turned over in bed, and breathed through the surges. It went on like this for hours. The contraction got further apart, which Tiffany said was likely because the castor oil wore off and then started to get closer again by 11 to 12 a.m. So this was the 2nd to early 3rd, February 3rd. Per Tiffany's advice on, what did I say? Per Tiffany's advice on the 3rd, oops. Per Tiffany's advice on signs and symptoms to look for, it seemed like I was heading into active labor, which was losing the mucus plug, intensity shift, and got the green light to go to the hospital. I was feeling the intensity of the surges, but was again excited because I was getting closer to meet my baby. I did it. I labored at home like I was supposed to, topping out around 20 hours since contractions started from the castor oil. Jay and I gathered up our bags and got in the car to go to Hoag Irvine. It was an eerie night with so much fog we could hardly see 5 feet in front of us. Jay drove as safely but as fast as he could since things were really intensifying for me and I needed to focus on breathing through the surge. I couldn't talk through them anymore. We eventually get to the hospital and check in just in time, I thought, as it felt like my water started to trickle in the lobby. Fortunately, a room was available and we got checked in very quickly. Sidebar, wow. The Hoag birthing suites are huge and gorgeous. Not bad for a hospital room. The intake nurse came in to ask some questions, and my nurse for the night helped me change into a gown and got into the bed to do a few tests. She first swabbed me to confirm if, in fact, my water broke, which it hadn't. Then she did a cervical exam, and this is where my heart and face sunk. Jay later told me he could tell I was defeated and approaching my limit. I was only 1 centimeter dilated after all of that. I couldn't believe it. How could I have gone nearly an entire day and dilated only to 1 centimeter? I was now doubting that I could tolerate this pain for another day or even relax enough to progress at all. For a moment, the nurse asked if I wanted to go home and come back, but then realized I was already 41 weeks and 5 days and was scheduled for an induction the next day anyway. Besides that, I'm thinking, how would I even be able to tell when to come back, you know? My contractions were already so close together, no one could really explain that other than possibly the castor oil doing weird things to my body. With that in mind, I decided to power through a few more hours off Benadryl and Reglan drip at the advice of my doula, Tiffany, who had arrived to the hospital shortly after us. This IV cocktail was supposed to make me sleep, but I just ended up drowsy and gripping the bed rail through each contraction. Tiffany left and assured me she would be back in a few hours. It was between 1 to 2 in the morning at this point, and I definitely was going to need her on her A game later that day. 6 a.m. rolled around and my contractions continued. I had another cervical exam which revealed 2.5 centimeters dilation. Progress, but not much. I started crying to the nurse and to Jay because I didn't know what to do. I could see my dreams of an unmedicated birth rapidly evaporating. Then, to my surprise, my OB walked in the room. She wasn't the doctor on call, but she saw somehow I was admitted and came to check on me. What an angel, truly. She saw the state I was in and bluntly told me to get the epidural. I knew that was a sign I needed to suck up my pride and get some pain relief if I had any hope still to have a vaginal delivery at all. So I consented and sat at the edge of the bed, leaning on Jay for 30 minutes while the anesthesiologist made his way to my room. It was so hard to hold still for the needle. So what they tell you is true. You're having to brace to the contractions while they're placing the epidural. But I honestly didn't even feel it because the contractions were so much worse. I got laid back in bed and waited for the epidural to work its magic. Big shout out to the anesthesiologist who placed the epidural perfectly and waited in my room for a good 10 minutes to make sure it was working properly. Around that 10-minute mark, I had a wave of relief. I could finally breathe and cried of happiness. Such a beautiful feeling. From that point on, it was Operation Dilation. My nurse and Tiffany got to work. They teamed up to turn me every 30 to 60 minutes using spinning babies positions to help my baby engage in my pelvis, along with making sure I was eating, hydrating, and sleeping. At midday, I'd gotten to 4 centimeters and my OB came to check on me again. Again, what a gem. If you want to know who it is, let me know. She encouraged me to have my water broken to speed things up. At this point, it had been over 24 hours, so I was pretty much ready to be done. I said yes, and over the next few hours, I jumped to 7 centimeters. I was finally in active labor. Hallelujah. My epidural was working perfectly, and I still didn't feel anything, so I continued to rest and sleep as much as I could. I heeded Tiffany's advice that I would need all of the energy I could give for the pushing stage. I quickly progressed again to 8 and 9 centimeters. After that, with the little help of a pit hit, that Tiffany calls it, a Pitocin hit, like just enough to kind of get me to 10 centimeters. However, my baby's heart rate was dipping during contractions, and the trend showed it was taking longer and longer to recover. The OB on call came in, explained the situation, and during the next cervical check was able to easily move my cervix over my baby's head and stated that we needed to start pushing. I was in shock it happened so quickly, this decision, but understood the urgency for the safety of my baby. She also prepared me that there might get to a point where I would have to decide to use forceps or convert to a C-section if the pushing stage stalled. I completely woke up at that and got my game face on. That moment Tiffany was talking about was here. I was both excited and scared. It was all going to be over soon and I would get to meet my little Jalen. But I was terrified. My entire birth plan was going to get shot to hell and end in a C-section. At this point, it was between 11 to 12 at night and I had been in labor for 40 hours, give or take. I turned on my upbeat labor playlist and got to pushing. The on-call OB had me do some test pushes, and after a little coaching, sadly, my beloved reverse Kegels in this situation, we're not going to cut it. She stated I was actually a good pusher, which was very exciting, and I wear that badge of honor. I will happily take that. Jalen tolerated this fairly well, so the OB left for about an hour to let me push in different positions with my night nurses, who were freaking amazing, by the way. The best cheerleaders I could have asked for. I started to feel confident and get in a groove. Then a sharp stabbing pain hit me in the right hip. I had Jay dig his elbow into me as hard as he could to counter pressure. Tiffany explained it was most likely his shoulder making its way down. Such a wild feeling. The OB came back in and was pleased with my progress. She could see his head. However, Jalen's heart rate started to dip again, and it was time to make the decision. I asked about the pros and cons of forceps versus C-section for me and Jalen. With the C-section, it was relatively easier for me, but might be more stressful to Jalen at this point since he had already descended and engaged into my pelvis a considerable degree. The OB would have to go, in essence, push him back up in order to take him out. With forceps, slight risk to Jalen with the force applied, but a neonatologist would stand by to assist and assure safety. But for me, the OB said it would cause more trauma to my pelvic floor, which I would have to agree with based on my experience as a pelvic floor physical therapist. I've seen some crazy situations with forceps. As I said before, there was no way I labored for 40 plus hours for this to end in a C-section. So good thing I know how to rehab severe perineal tears. I chose the forceps and the OB prepared. At this point, I am riding on pure adrenaline. My heart rate is going crazy, and I'm focusing on my breathing in preparation for the last moments of labor before the birth of my son. Thank God for Tiffany, because she remembered I could have a mirror. This helps so much, having visual feedback. I had a few more contractions before the forceps were placed, so I got to use the mirror for feedback. And I can't explain the excitement of seeing Jalen's dark head of hair, both totally shocking and motivating to see myself like that. The forceps were now getting placed, and I had my dream team in each ear pumping me up. Tiff to my left, Jay on the right. I can still hear Tiffany's and Jay's voices. Give it all you got and keep him down, Tiffany kept saying, and Jay said, dig deep, babe. Our son's almost here. With that, the OB said to give it the best pushes I had yet. I gathered all the strength I had, and kid you not, imagine hitting a squat PR, because that was the position I ended up being in. In 3 pushes, he was out. I couldn't believe it. He was out. It was over. At 2:12 a.m., my baby boy was born. The OB placed him on my chest while the neonatologist monitored Jalen, and I felt the most insane rush of emotions, mainly that being pure joy and happiness. I birthed Jalen vaginally, and that it was over. My baby was finally in my arms. Later, I got to see the most beautiful photos Tiffany took of those first few moments. I also felt the most intense, enveloping love with Jalen on my chest and Jay putting his arms around both of us. I was already so obsessed with my little family. As I was getting lost in baby bliss, there was a shift in the energy in the room I was subconsciously aware of. The OB nurses were still working on me. I began observing what was going on down there, and before I knew what was happening, I started shaking and felt cold, which at first was a welcome change to the intense labor heat I was feeling before. I started to get scared, first because there was an urgency I could sense from the OB, and then uncontrollable shaking. It didn't feel safe for me to hold Jalen, so I urged Jay to take him. The OB started telling nurses what meds to give me, called in an ultrasound, and then I started feeling pain again. At first I was confused because Jalen was born and the placenta was out. Why was there pain? I looked down and I was getting a vigorous fundal massage. Shit, I must be still bleeding. The OB saw me looking down there and explained that the umbilical cord was extremely short and may have caused incomplete detachment of the placenta. Based on the ultrasound, clots were forming, and because my uterus was so fatigued, could not push them out, so blood was pooling, and the OB had to reach her hand inside to pull them out. Otherwise, I was headed to the operating room. Tiffany was still there and coordinating my care, as well as ensuring Jalen was getting his first feed with a colostrum I had previously harvested and brought to the hospital. Thank God I did that. Thank God for the Breastfeeding Center of Orange County for teaching me how to do that. I looked at Tiffany and trusted she would advocate for me, as I couldn't focus or track everything that was being done for me. Good God, the shaking was intolerable, and then I became nauseous and tried to vomit, but had nothing to throw up, so I just leaned over to dry heave. At some point, my nervous system must have given up, and I unfortunately passed out from the pain, fatigue, drugs, or some combination of all three. There were a couple times I recall opening my eyes and seeing Jay holding and rocking our boy in the corner. I really love that man so much. I am so lucky he is my husband and partner in life. I eventually came to full consciousness around 6:30 to 7 a.m. when the nursing staff changed, and all I could remember feeling was victorious. Jalen and I were alive and well. I'll process this and assess bodily damage later, I remember telling myself. I did it and I couldn't believe it. I had the nurse hand Jalen to me, and I finally got the skin-to-skin time I wanted so dearly. In a way, not only am I sad about not getting the golden hour, but grieving the birth I wanted. Then there's the guilt I feel because Jalen is safe and healthy, and that is the ultimate goal at the end of the day. Some women never have this gift and blessing after all. I have so much to be grateful for. This was just all very unexpected and was unpredictable. But when I looked into Jalen's sweet face and tiny little eyes, I forgot it all. Again, I'll process that later. Now is later. Sometime later, I spoke with Tiffany and we sort of went through it all together. She was still so baffled how the castor oil acted on my body. We don't know why it did what it did. Maybe because all of the factors we found out after the birth, we'll never really know. So what we found out was, 1, the umbilical cord was extremely short. This was a major contributing factor for Jalen's continuous heart rate dips and possibly his position in utero. 2, he was asynclitic and occiput posterior, where you want to be occiput anterior. OP means sunny side up, if you've ever heard of that term before. And typically you have back labor, which I didn't have. Tiffany was shocked that we didn't know either of these things beforehand. Asynclitic means his head was tilted in the pelvis, which could have prevented direct pressure on my cervix and subsequently stalling dilation labor. And again, OP, sunny side up, is so challenging because his head is not in the right position and it's harder to push out of the pelvic outlet. Typically, there's a ton of back labor, what I just said, and like back pain with an OP baby. So that was also weird, seeing as I didn't have any back pain at all. Learning all this and seeing my birth through Tiffany's eyes gave me more appreciation for what my body did. Tiffany was shocked and awed I was able to vaginally birth a baby with those factors, as she has seen many end in a C-section. So even though I didn't get the birth I wanted, my birth journey showed me how strong I really am. I now fully understand the meaning of the phrase, strong as a mother. I'm still not entirely sure of the reason I had this experience. Still waiting for the 2020 hindsight. Again, I wrote this like very long ago and still waiting for the 2020 hindsight. One thing I can say though is that thank God for modern medicine. I always say there's a time and a place. I shudder to think what would happen if I didn't have modern day interventions. Maybe it's a lesson in flexibility. My preview to motherhood. Ha. Which I am learning to do more of every day. Maybe my story will also help someone else. At the end of the day, it is what it is, and I went through with the flow and order of my birth preferences the best I could. I am proud of my body and everything that it did, from conception, nearly 10 months of pregnancy, and birth. I'm grateful for it all, and this little family I now call mine. So, at the end of the day, it's just, it wasn't exactly a calm and flow and spiritual awakening, I guess, in a way that I kind of wanted. Maybe it is now after the fact, still working on it. But it was a hard fought victory. That's for sure. I spoke to a doula and birth photographer recently who said, you know, some births are magical and, you know, seemingly like soft and, you know, beautiful. And then she said some births are hard fought battles and victory. And I definitely resonate with that. So I know that was a lot, looking at 25 minutes here, but thank you for joining me. If you've made it this far, honestly, I think it's healing to kind of be able to talk through this now and again, appreciate what my body has done, you know, maybe on, I guess, maybe one piece of hindsight 2020 is that all of the prep work I did allowed me to birth you know, my son vaginally with all of those factors. Again, many OP sunny side babies end in C-section, and I was able to push him out. So all of that pelvic floor, like prenatal preventative PT was, you know, not for nothing. And actually one thing I didn't write down was, I guess, because I maybe I wasn't totally aware yet, but on my 6-week appointment, I actually had learned I had a very superficial grade 1 tear, even with forceps, grade 1 perineal tear with the use of forceps, which is completely unheard of. In my own practice, when someone's had forceps, it's really, really rough, grade 2 and more of the time grade 3, and just an ungodly amount of stitches. So I feel very victorious in that knowledge. But yeah, I mean, I kind of had it all. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions, general questions about pregnancy, labor, delivery, or if you're feeling like you need some extra help, I'm here. So thanks for listening and have a great day.